Welcome to the Jay-Z Show. I'm Zafar Sobhan, editor of Counterpoint, tuning in from Dhaka, Bangladesh. John Danilowicz, my partner in crime, seems to have jumped on the bandwagon and joined the BJP victory procession in West Bengal. John?
Well, I'm actually in Arlington, Virginia, but I thought based on what we're going to be talking about today, I would put a scene from Kolkata behind me. And frankly, this might be the closest I get to India, judging by the reactions I've gotten to some of my recent comments.
I would imagine so. I would imagine so. And we are joined by Faisal Mahmud, who is currently the managing editor of the Daily Wada, but prior to this was Bangladesh's press minister in our High Commission in New Delhi, and of course is known to those in the Bangladesh media and who read the Bangladesh media as a journalist, columnist, reporter, analyst of great repute. Faisal, so great you could join us today.
Thank you, Zafar Bhai. Good morning, Zafar Bhai. Good evening, John. Good to see you. I'm glad to
Right.
be here in the show.
Good. And the reason you're here, Faisal, is we could think of no one better to talk us through the West Bengal State Assembly elections, which have just concluded. And what does it mean and what are the implications for Bangladesh? You've just returned to Bangladesh after about a year and a bit in New Delhi. Tell us your thoughts. How do you see this?
Thank you, Zafar Bhai. To be honest, I'm not that surprised because in the past 1 year, while I was posted in Delhi, I had the chance to travel to West Bengal twice. And the general sense that I got there by talking with people, especially the taxi drivers, because when I hop into a taxi, I usually strike up a conversation with them just to get the sense of the place. And I
Sure.
had that senses that okay, probably BJP is going to make a big inroads in the upcoming state election. But I wasn't expecting exactly this landslide victory because getting 207 seats is considered as a landslide victory. But there are lots of factors. First of all, Mamata Banerjee is there for more than three term. Is there for 3 terms, and anti-incumbency is always a big factor, especially even more so in this region because if you look at the data, West Bengal is the fourth most populous state of India, but in terms of per capita income, they're at number 24th out of 31. So there is a general resentment among the poor people in West Bengal that Mamata Banerjee wasn't being able to do much for the state. Whereas when they look at the western part of the country and the Hindi heartland of northern India, they see that Narendra Modi has at least they have this idea that Narendra Modi has transformed those parts with Modi magic. Because in India, uh, co- I mean, there's this belief and there's this general understanding that Modi has implemented his Gujarat model when he came back to power as the prime when he came into power as a prime minister. So the states which still hasn't gotten any BJP leadership, they are the backward states. So that was one important factor, and also BJP relentlessly worked to create inroads in West Bengal because they also saw this state as the last bastion. And again, if you look at the data in the past, just in the past 2 and 2.5 years, uh, RSS, which is closely tied with BJP,
Sure.
they have multiplied their regional centers. I think I saw some data where they used to have like around 500 something centers in West Bengal, but now they have more than 2,000. So they reach out to the people and they make sure that BJP has become popular among the people. So
No,
these
that's
are the
clearly
factors.
a big target. I mean, they have been targeting West Bengal, and they actually put a pretty good showing in 2021. Then in 2019, in the general election, they won a lot of seats as well. John, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so there's two issues I've been thinking about. And again, I look forward to learning from both Faisal and Zafar on both of these. The first is I had a hard time over the past year and a half trying to understand why the Indian government was so hostile toward the interim government and Professor Yunus. Um, in light of the election results, I mean, people had always said that domestic politics was playing a role, but kind of in 2020 hindsight, it seems to me, at least from where I'm sitting, that this was very much something where even if it hadn't been there at the beginning, the BJP decided that they could use what was happening in Bangladesh as an election issue. So
Yeah.
again, I'd be very interested in comments on that and how significant it was. And kind of related to that, in terms of the Bangladesh reaction, even before the election, we saw an effort, which I thought was interesting, if not a bit unusual, by the BNP government to actually reach out to the BJP party as opposed to, or in addition to reaching out to the Indian government. So I can see some benefit to that, perhaps, if the BJP is coming to power in West Bengal, if there are issues like water sharing that are important to Bangladesh, having good relations with the BJP may make sense. But the risk I see, or would at least perceive, is the backlash within Bangladesh, given the BJP and what it stands for, and how this is going to play. So again, those are the issues I've been thinking about. But I'm admittedly not an expert on India, on the BJP, or on India-Bangladesh relations.
No, I mean, that's fair enough. I mean, Faisal, what I would say is I think your analysis is good. It's spot on, except I think one element of it, which you did not, maybe you will touch on later on in the conversation, is there was a very specific, explicit anti-Bangladesh theme to the election. And in fact, this has long been part and parcel of the BJP's rhetoric in West Bengal. I would, in fact, suggest that their entire election campaign, their entire electoral strategy has been based on demonizing Bangladeshis and people they see as Bangladeshis and not really granting them the status of Indian citizen, and that, of course, is a big part of it. And of course, the other thing you did not mention was the SIR, which was the Special Intensive Revision of the voter rolls, which took off some 9 million people, I believe, from the rolls, 90 lakhs, and of which 2.7 million, 27, were in fact contesting. I mean, it's certainly true that not all 90 lakhs were necessarily, some were dead, some have moved away, but certainly a large percentage, almost 1/3 of them, had been contesting. And so this is a big part of what was going on. And to speak to John's earlier point, it seems to me that a lot of what we see vis-a-vis India and Bangladesh and the rhetoric you see in bilateral relations also is speaking to a domestic audience in India. Now, the question is, now the elections are done, the elections have been won, will the BJP then try and pander to their electorate in West Bengal, or will they now figure, well, that's done, they don't need to do any more? What's your sense of that?
Um, First, I have to make a confession. I have this initial resistance of bringing up this Bangladesh issue the first place because I forgot that I'm no longer posted in the High Commission. So there was this no-go area. But then again, I can speak about it right now. Of course,
There
Bangladesh
you
was
go.
probably the biggest factor. Because in the past 1 year, I've seen how Indian media, especially the West Bengal media, have been portraying this infiltration of Bangladeshis. And you know the story about the Pushins, and that has been happening in the West Bengal border and the Assam borders. So yes, they have been successfully using this, sense of fear, and the interim government, the whole tenure of the interim government, the Indian media and the establishment. I'm not talking about the establishment because they had largely maintained a very, polished lines, but their media did the part for them. Bang, I got this general sense when I visited West Bengal. They have developed this resentment towards Bangladeshi people uh, mostly because of this constant bombardment by the media, and also by the factor that they genuinely, I mean, a large part of them genuinely believed that there was this torture against Hindus under the interim government. They were
Yes.
being constantly fed, and they were living within these echo chambers where those were amplified. So the fear was quite genuine, and BJP, of course, stoked that fear, and they used that fear in their favor. And the when SIR started, I think it started in Bihar. And as soon as it started, the Congress, the main opposition of Modi's BJP, uh, they were very vocal about it. And I think Rahul Gandhi started talking against SIR since October. I mean, he was vociferously talking about it. And there was this, at one point, there was this joke that whenever Rahul Gandhi comes to any public gathering, he shows this chart and try to make people understand the evils of SIR. But you know what? That Rahul Gandhi's over usage of SIR sort of backfired for Congress. That's my understanding because the way Delhi intelligence and others, they were saying that Rahul Gandhi was doing the wrong politics, but it worked in Bengal. It worked. I mean, you mentioned that 9 million voters were disenfranchised because they couldn't. They were out. Their names were not in the list when that SIR was done. So Yes, of course, SIR, through SIR, they have disenfranchised those Muslim voters and they couldn't vote. And now the main fear, uh, like what happened in Assam, that might be replicated. This I'm not saying that that will happen, but there is a chance that West Bengal might go for that. And I don't think they will back out just because they have won the election, because that's
Ah.
essentially has ingrained to their main political agenda. If they all of a sudden they started backing out, then they will lose their politics there. So I think that the Assam model might be replicated in West Bengal as well. That's the main fear.
So
Yeah, it's
yes,
also.
go ahead, John.
No, I was gonna say it's also interesting for me. I'm always thinking about this question of identity, and I know in Bangladesh, this issue of identity. To what extent is a Bangladeshi Bengali Muslim, Bengali Muslim? What does that mean? It's interesting now to think of that in terms of what this means for the future of West Bengal and for the population there, and what does it mean for the Bengaliness of the electorate? Is their Hinduness now more important than their Bengali identity? What does it mean if you're a Bengali Muslim who lives in West Bengal? So again, all of these issues related to identity, which gets to Zafar's point, is okay. What happens now if you turn this switch on and you've politicized, weaponized these issues in order to gain votes? Can you now, after the election, say that's all right? Just kidding. We didn't really mean that. So now let's take a more reasonable approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. I mean, it could be that now there's going to be some kind of a conflict between the interests of the central government and that of the BJP in West Bengal. And I mean, I think that is going to be an issue because I think certainly the government of India does want to try and normalize relations with Bangladesh. But I think in light of what we've seen in the election campaign in West Bengal is going to be very difficult. I don't think you can put the genie back into the bottle. I mean, to speak to your point, John, I think once it's out, it's out. And so I think they've really unleashed something which is going to be very, very hard to turn back. And then the question, of course, becomes what is the impact going to be here in Bangladesh? Because we're sitting here in Bangladesh watching all of this. And of course, in Bangladesh, you also have similar discussions. You have people in the country who think that, look, we would like to have a cooperative, civil, cordial relationship with India. It's not in our interest to be hostile. But at the same time, you have a large minority of voters who think that, look, this is, we can never have friendly relations with India because India is unremittingly hostile towards us. And I would suggest that after last week's election results, the latter camp is certainly in the ascendant, and it's going to be very difficult for Tariq Rahman and the BNP to try and mend fences with India. The hope had been that, for whatever reason, India had decided to, declare the interim government of Professor Yunus sort of is the enemy and were very uncooperative towards them. And we had seen them moving towards the BNP government and looking at it a little differently. The BNP government had also reciprocated. But now, in the light of this election result, I wonder if that limits the space, if that reduces the space for the BNP in Bangladesh to reach out. Faisal, what do you think?
Both countries' executive branches are trying to mend the relationship because India is also in the course correcting mood because I believe they also felt like that they didn't look at the interim administration. I mean, what's the proper word to use? I don't know, but they had this feeling of course correcting. But what the centers feel, what the country's centers feel, I mean, it has to be reflected on the ground. And now you have a very hostile. I'm using the word hostile politicians at the helm of West Bengal, which is the most important state for Bangladesh. And these old videos of the new chief minister Shubhendu Adhikari is circulating in the social media. That's not helping. And people, even in this era of misinformation, people even don't have this sense of sanitization that this video was old. I mean, some of the videos were old. So I think it's going to be very hard balancing act for both the country's government. For India, it has to be central government because they have this federal system. But then again, if economy is going to be the main driving factor between these two countries, then that the course has to be corrected. Because if you see the news from West Bengal, they have lost lots of business because Bangladeshi people who do their shopping in West Bengal, they have stopped going there.
Sure,
And
medical
I can give an
tourism, the whole thing.
right, of course. And I can give you an example of like the conversation that I had in a private chat group. I mean, they're very excited about this election because they thought like after this election they'll be able to go to India and West Bengal. But in the past 2 days, after seeing all these videos of, I mean,
Hmm.
these are being amplified, like Muslim uh,
Right.
uh, people are being harassed in West Bengal. Now they say that no, this is not a good time to be there. So I
Yeah,
think I
I
think the two
wouldn't go.
countries' government, exactly. So I think the two countries' government need to, I understand this is just right after election. So right after election, anything can happen for a few days, but it has to calm down, and
Yeah.
they have to, go back to their senses.
No, but and
Yeah.
then but here's the thing, and John, if I could just ask you a specific question, and in light of this, what do you think do you make of the fact that the incoming Indian High Commissioner is in fact not a career diplomat? And I think it's the first time
Mhm.
they've done it. In the past, we've had former foreign secretaries, but we've never had um, a political appointee as a high commissioner. And when I say political appointee, he is in fact a politician. He is a one-time TMC leader who then switched and became a leader in the BJP. And so, is there a message? And do you imagine that he's going to come and take a hard line? I mean, what does that tell you? Is a former diplomat? What's your how do
Yeah.
you interpret that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, what a difference a few weeks makes, because I think when we last talked about this, we agreed that it was an interesting and probably an overall positive mood by India. It showed, the interest in the relationship, a desire to take a new course. But now, in light of the election results, it carries all this baggage with it, because now, even though the ambassador is an appointee of the central government, his linkages to the BJP and to West Bengal, in a sense, will make him responsible in at least a public way for anything that comes out of West Bengal and comes out of the new government. And
That's a very
meanwhile,
good point. Yeah.
Sheikh Hasina, in her inimitable fashion, rushed to congratulate the BJP on this historic victory, and then rushed to specifically congratulate the new chief minister, despite these previous comments that Faisal had pointed out. And then, of course, on the kind of the bigger picture, you had Bangladesh's foreign minister had a very positive visit, which got a lot of play in India. But since his visit, not only did you have the elections in West Bengal, but you had a very high-profile visit to China. So
Yeah.
you're right. What had looked like a steady course of improved relations between India and Bangladesh now has encountered some serious headwinds. And if, as rumored, the prime minister's first foreign visit ends up being Beijing instead of New Delhi, that will only add fuel to the fire. So yeah, it's an interesting time, Faisal, for your former colleagues in New Delhi. I'm sure they're earning their keep.
Yeah. No, you raise a very good point, which hadn't occurred to me, is that in the past, a high commissioner could also distance themselves from what was happening in West Bengal. Could kind of play a good cop, bad cop kind of thing. This is going to be incredibly difficult for the incoming high commissioner of India. Everything that happens in West Bengal is going to be hung around his neck. And because
Mhm.
of who he is and what his background is, so I think that's a very interesting point. I mean, my sense is that if now when I look at his appointment, it seems to me that Modi was anticipating this victory,
Mhm.
and they're doubling down, and they're really going to take a harder stand. But that again, that flies in the face of the diplomacy we've seen in the last few months. Again, from your experience in Delhi, and I'm sure you still have your ear to the ground, you talk to a lot of people. What do you think, Faisal?
John is the veteran diplomat here, so I think he covered the diplomacy part. But again, this is an uncharted territory because, as you mentioned, there hasn't been any political appointee in Bangladesh, as far as I know. Um, but again, what my reading is that they're upping their ante because they usually it has always been reserved for the career diplomats and Indian Foreign
Yeah,
Service.
very
Even my
senior
position, like
people. Yeah. Hmm.
right, and even there in other embassies and high commissions of India, like in my position, like the guy who is in charge of the press, they always appoint people from the Indian Foreign Service. They don't appoint any political appointees. So they have this practice of appointing their own career diplomats in almost every positions. Even more, so, of course, in the position of ambassador and high commissions as well, they're very reserved about appointing any
It's
political
very rare.
person,
It's very rare indeed.
right? Right.
in India.
And historically, when I see the examples, I see that they usually appoint political heavyweights during the time of, a critical time or very sensitive time.
Ah,
So I
there you
believe that
go.
now that's their reading on Bangladesh. As I mentioned, they are in sort of like a course correcting mood, because what they did during the interim government's period, I believe they have this sense of feeling that they
But
have to reach
this
out.
is not who you would choose, or he wouldn't be my first choice to correct the course. Now, for instance, when we had Vikram Doraiswamy as the High Commissioner here, he was very popular in Bangladesh. He did very well. Went to London. Is now moving to Beijing, I believe. And we had heard when Mr. Verma was announced to be leaving to Brussels, and Mr. Verma was well liked. He didn't quite have the same profile as Ambassador Doraiswamy, but certainly, I think. People had nothing against him. We had heard that Sudeep Chakraborty, who had been a former deputy high commissioner in
Yes.
Dhaka, was going to be coming, and people were quite excited about that because they're thinking, well, these are people who understand Bangladesh, who served in Bangladesh, who have pre-existing relations. So it's none of that. So it's going to be really interesting to see in which direction things move.
Yeah, and I was just thinking from my diplomatic experience, it's always an interesting thing to watch in terms of, who shows up at events hosted by foreign embassies in Dhaka, because,
Right.
countries, stocks rise and fall. So it was probably a time during the Awami League period when you had to be pretty brave to go to an event at the U.S. embassy, because you were going to be questioned afterwards of why were you hobnobbing with Peter Haas, et cetera. Certainly for, the Pakistani High Commission, they were very lonely for a number of years in terms of who was willing to engage with them. I think the Indian embassy or High Commission felt a little bit of that during the interim government period, but then, right after the change, it was almost a kind of celebratory, triumphalist kind of approach, from the Indian side, and all of a sudden, again, it's a who's who of, Bangladesh's elite, accepting invitations. But again, it'll be interesting to see just in terms of that kind of the public mood and kind of the political reality in terms of how it will be seen in Bangladesh in the coming days to be, seen as close to or supportive of, the India-Bangladesh relationship.
Well, I think it was it Harold Macmillan who said, "Events, dear boy, events." I mean, of course, what we need to see is what happens now. I mean, it's all we're prognosticating, the three of us, but and again, a lot of things depend on the hand which one is dealt. So, for instance, if you look at the incoming BNP government, they of course inherited a fairly difficult situation, which was made more difficult by the war in Iran, which broke out very shortly afterwards. So who knows actually what is going to happen in between India and Bangladesh over the next 6 to 9 months. A lot of it actually depends on, what happens with the monsoon rains, what happens with the ongoing war in Iran, what happens in various other theaters around the world. We have, other elections taking place elsewhere. What impact will these have? So it is going to be hard to say, but I think certainly if I'm now turning the conversation back to Bangladesh, I mean, for the BNP government, this is one more challenge. They inherited a difficult situation. Then all of a sudden there was the war in Iran broke out, which has raised all sorts of difficulties in terms of the cost of fuel, which then has a knock-on effect for the cost of food, and so they're really kind of struggling with that issue. And then this is yet another problem because, as I have mentioned, my sense is that the BNP were looking to normalize relations with India. And as Faisal has pointed out, and I think we all are in agreement here, that cordial relations between the two countries really are fairly indispensable. I mean, it doesn't really make any economic or otherwise sense for the countries to be at loggerheads. We don't want a situation where you have this hostile relation between India and Pakistan. That's certainly not the model for India in Bangladesh. It's not in really anyone's interest. But because of domestic considerations, I think it's going to be very, very difficult. We have, you have YouTubers, you have people inside of Bangladesh who are going to, every time something happens across the border, they're going to be making a big deal of this. It's going to be extraordinarily difficult for the government to reach out and normalize relations. How do you think they're going to square that circle, Faisal? Because you had mentioned earlier that this is something that has to be done in your assessment.
Anti-India that's a potent political weapon in Bangladesh, and that will remain so. I
Yes.
mean, I read this beautiful article of Faham Abdus Salam, and he mentioned that there are in Bangladesh to remain politically relevant, you have to be within this invisible triangle, and at one end of the triangle there is this. He cannot be seen as a pro-Indian political party or political person. So
Yeah.
that's going to be a very tricky area for BNP to navigate because. Normalizing relationship with India in both the front, like in political front, in an economic front, is very important. I can guarantee you that there are at least thousands of people, like even thousands of cancer patients who are waiting to go to India to get their treatment
Mhm.
because we're so dependent on India, at least on that front, like in the medical front.
Sure.
But again, BNP cannot be seen as a party which has this tendency of becoming too pro-India, like Awami League. And if they do so, then their opposition, Jamaat Islami and the new party NCP,
Mhm.
they will have this beautiful, potent political weapon, and that which will be of course, amplified by a lot of YouTubers, and that's gonna make
Mhm.
politics very difficult for BNP. So, I mean, of
Yeah.
course, they have to again, they have to chart their course very carefully. Uh, Otherwise, there has to be a political cost for that.
Yeah, and John, you've seen this, of course, when you have been serving in Bangladesh. You've
Mhm.
seen the various currents. How do you see the BNP squaring the circle?
Yeah, so there's two things that springs to mind. The first is that there's a natural kind of cyclical nature of this given Bangladesh's history and the political calendar. So in March and December, the focus returns to 1971, and obviously it's tough on Pakistan at those periods of time, and India derives some benefit. Um, Now July and August becomes a month that stirs up a lot of emotion. So again, you ride those waves. The other thing, which just thinking about this, and I haven't seen that article that Faisal mentioned from Faham, but that's an interesting point. And I'm just wondering whether there's any downside in Bangladeshi politics to be seen as too close to China. It seems that as much as I'd love to say everyone in Bangladesh loves America, I know that's not true. But it seems to me that at least on the surface, probably the country which is in the best position these days, and from a political standpoint, the country which has the biggest upside for the government is China. And the foreign minister's visit to China, and if in fact that's where the prime minister ends up going first, while India may be mainly worried about Pakistan, really the dark horse in this, or the person or the country that's in the best position to exploit this situation, might be China.
No, I mean, I think that's right. I think domestically there is no downside whatsoever. Interestingly enough, of course, we always talk about the bilateral trade deficit with India, whereas our bilateral trade deficit with China is much greater. But a lot of this is to do with perception. So, as far as I'm aware, there is absolutely no negative domestic fallout for closer ties with China. I think the challenge there is, and then this, I'll bring it back to you, John, is what would that then do in terms of Bangladesh's relationship with the United States? I think that is the challenge. The fear would be that if we are seen to be hewing too close to China, then that was going to cause trouble with the US. I think India, in this sense, becomes more of a sort of a bit player in Bangladesh. It's really now, when we're talking about China, it's not sort of China versus India, it's sort of China versus the US. And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, clearly that's a risk. I mean, I think the greatest risk is in the security sphere, less so maybe the economic sphere. And, as long as you're buying enough Boeings and you're, eating a lot of good American beef and soybean and wheat, et cetera, these days, you can probably get away with some, kind of dalliance with China. And again, one thing I would give the Bangladesh government credit for, and particularly the foreign minister, is he's very good at kind of keeping his bases covered. So I'm certain that both before and since his visit to Beijing, he's had some conversations with his American counterparts to reassure the United States and to kind of downplay whatever may have come up in terms of the discussions there.
No, and
Again, I'm not. Yeah,
yeah.
good.
No, no, I think that again speaks to the U.S. Bangladesh trade deal, which again has been criticized by many
Mhm.
people, and it's a subject of much contention. And but I think again, if you look at the big picture, perhaps what the government is figuring out, or is they're calculating, is that if we keep America happy when it comes to trade, then that frees us for maneuver in other directions. And maybe that's
Mhm.
part of the thinking process there.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. Faisal?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. But then again, you have seen how the US Bangladesh trade deal are being criticized by every quarter right now. But
True.
I want to say one thing. If we just simply put the data, like what happened if there was a 37% tariff, and now what will happen if there is a 19% tariff and then zero duty in terms of finished product if you made it with US cotton, then it's pretty even that that was a good deal for us, given the current context.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
And,
this
and,
is, of course, one of the things we've been talking
yeah.
about. John's written about it as well, and we've discussed it on the show. There are two things. There's one, looking at the deal in the abstract, in deciding, well, is it a good deal? Is it a bad deal? Could it have been better? Could it have been worse? Then there's the other part, is looking at it in the concrete. What was actually
Exactly.
possible?
Mm.
And when we took it from that point of view, it's unclear. I mean, I still think the jury is somewhat out. I've heard good arguments on both sides. John, I think you wanted to
Yeah,
add
no,
something there.
I was just going to say though, but if you look at, statements in the last few weeks from the finance minister, the foreign minister, the commerce minister, they've all fully endorsed the trade agreement. An assistant U.S. trade representative visited, had a good set of meetings, and nobody from the BNP side, not members of parliament, not people in the government, are openly criticizing the deal. There's criticism,
Yeah.
but it's not coming from the
Not from the
government. But
government. No, that's true.
yes,
The government
yeah,
has now owned the deal. Of course, there was a
right.
lot of talk on the talk show saying, "Well, this deal was made in the last days of the interim government, and was that a correct thing to do?" And but it's clear, the BNP could have then taken a position and said, "Well, look, this is nothing to do with us." But they have very clearly embraced this. Not only, as you said, they could have done two or three things. They could have disavowed the deal, or they could have said, "Okay, we're going to follow up on the deal, but we're reluctant. Our hands are tied. This has been
Hmm.
forced on us by the previous administration." But they've done neither of those things. It seems to me that they have embraced it to a large extent, and so that's interesting. And I think maybe that, as you say, that will free up diplomatic capital and space elsewhere. And I think, Faisal, you've also written about this, if I'm not wrong. And I think you have crossed swords with a few people in the intelligentsia, because there are not too many people in Bangladesh who have come out and taken a positive stance on the deal, if I'm not
I
wrong.
just, as I mentioned, I just simply put some numbers in Gemini, and the numbers told me that okay, given the current context, it was a good deal. Therefore, I just want to add one line about China.
Yeah,
China has this advantage of not being seen as like the way US or India are seen in Bangladesh. Even if you talk with people in the hinterland, what they know about China is that it's a rich country and it's getting richer. They have this surplus money, which they're able to give it to us. That's the general sense. And you have seen how Chinese are funding these infrastructures all across the country. And that's why I think, and also there is this another idea about China, that China is not meddling with the political thing. They're sort of like seen as an economic power who are interested in economy, not in the politics. So that's an
yeah.
advantage for China, which of course India and US don't have.
Hmm.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, on that note, I think we've passed our half hour. This is a fantastic discussion. I think we touched upon a lot of interesting things. Faisal, we're going to have you back. I think it was very interesting what you had to say. John, it's always a pleasure. And to our audience out there, thank you so much. Catch us again 2 weeks from today, and let us see what the world looks like then. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.